Good morning and welcome back to the Independent Republican Mike Graham right here on TalkTV. It is the only place for the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We've just been telling you breaking news, Just Stop Oil marching down a particular road in London. I'm not quite sure exactly where it is, but there's been an altercation. A man got out of a car and punched to the ground one of the Just Stop Oil slow marchers, then kicked him in the head. Now this is something I've been warning about. There's not one sign of any police officer in sight. Obviously the police are now in a situation where they must stop these protests, because if they don't, there will be more trouble, there will be more violence, there will be more problems for those people who have got nothing better to do than march about slowly in London, holding up traffic. People are getting absolutely enraged by it. People are getting absolutely beside themselves with fury. And so naturally, of course, you can't condone violence, but naturally these people are frustrated and they're lashing out. And so the police have got now a duty to arrest these people, to get them off the streets and to prevent them from doing it every single day, because this is now untenable. It's a totally and utterly ridiculous situation which could have been solved by the police but has not been solved by the police. They've now got the powers to arrest these bozos, so get on with it and stop preventing traffic from being able to move around the capital city of one of Europe's largest economies. For heaven's sake, do something. 0344 499 1000. As soon as we have that video footage for you, we will play it to you. But right now, we're going to talk to Ben Jones, the Deputy Case Director of the Free Speech Union, because an extraordinary story emerged late yesterday. Nigel Farage, the former leader of UKIP, the former leader of the Brexit Party, a man who has been vilified most of his political career. But I can say, as an individual and as a personal friend of his, that actually Nigel Farage is a very decent man. He is not in any way the way he is described by Coutts Bank, which is, to wit, he is seen as racist and xenophobic. He is considered by many to be a disingenuous grifter. Being associated with Nigel Farage presents a material and ongoing reputational risk to the bank. They talk about him being friends with Novak Djokovic. They talk about him being friends with Donald Trump. They talk about his views on LGBT being untenable. They talk about his views on Brexit and his role in the Brexit campaign as being unhelpful. I mean, this is quite an extraordinary dossier, which, as Nigel Farage says, is a bit akin to the dossier that somebody would be putting together against a master criminal before a trial, for heaven's sake. But it's a bank which is supposed to be there for one thing and one thing only, to manage somebody's money. Let's find out from Ben Jones how we could have got here. Ben, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
How could we have got here? Because I sort of have various incredulous conversations with different people who say, you know, well, we've all got views that some people at Coutts might not like. Are we going to be next? Are we going to have our bank accounts cancelled? Are they going to look at our social media statements and decide that we are, you know, not worthy characters?
It's been astonishing watching people on the left, journalists on the left, in the years since the Occupy movement, to now be 15 years later, where they're uncritically accepting the claims of banks and press releases by banks, not investigating them, not casting a critical eye over them at all, simply because they don't like Nigel Farage very much. Fine, if you don't like Nigel Farage, that's completely fine. But they've been completely blinded to the larger issue that if this is going to happen to Nigel Farage, it's going to happen to a lot of other people who don't have the platform or the ability to raise these issues, to point out that this is happening to people, to sound the alarm about what's going on.
Exactly right. And I mean, the BBC in particular have been to blame for this. You know, they swallowed hook, line and sinker, a sort of a leak that came out of Coutts a couple of weeks ago, which suggested that, you know, this was nothing to do with anything ideological. It was nothing to do with any political decision. It was purely and simply that Nigel Farage didn't have enough money. And so they kind of gloated, didn't they, the BBC and their business correspondent, as did the likes of John Sopel, sort of gloated that, oh, isn't it funny, ha-ha, that poor old Nigel Farage hasn't got enough money to keep his bank account at Coutts, the snob. I mean, the stench of hypocrisy was quite ridiculous, right? And it turns out, of course, that not only did the BBC publish that without challenging it, they positively wanted it to be true, but it isn't.
No, and the entire establishment narrative, if you like, has completely crumbled. We were told that it was something to do with Russia, although no one seems willing to repeat that particular accusation outside the House of Commons, where you have parliamentary privilege. Then we were told it's because he didn't have enough money. The lie has been given to that as well. I don't know what business the bank had in disclosing the personal information of one of its customers,
right.
presumably something that many customers of Coutts and NatWest will find deeply troubling. And so the whole narrative has collapsed. Now we have the incontrovertible proof that it was because Nigel Farage doesn't share the bank's values.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what business the bank has in having values and enforcing those values on its customers. It's a complete nonsense.
Well, I mean, maybe they should tell us what their values are. Maybe they should explain perhaps what investments they hold and whether we might not have the values that they have, and we may not wish to bank with them, knowing what we know about them. You know, and as Julie Hartley-Brewer pointed out this morning, you know, the Royal Bank, which is what they're known as, presumably hold accounts for members of the royal family. Do they hold an account for Prince Andrew? Do they hold an account for any terrorists? Do they hold accounts for anybody who's committed any crime? You know, this is a problem not just for Coutts. It's a problem presumably for the entire banking group, which of course is partly owned by the taxpayer.
Yeah, of whom 17 million voted for Brexit, and I think about 5 million voted for Nigel Farage's party at the European elections in 2019. So it seems to me that the bank and NatWest is saying to all of these individuals, well, you don't share our values, you're not welcome. That seems disastrous from a business point of view, but from the perspective of freedom of speech, it's incredibly troubling. And I think perhaps the most sinister manifestation of cancel culture that we've seen at the Free Speech Union. As you know, Mike, we had our own run-in last year with PayPal, where our accounts were closed with no warning, no justification. They were reinstated after a massive backlash in the media and politicians as well. And since then, we have met with and been campaigning for the government to change the financial regulations to protect people from this type of political discrimination. And we already have the position in law where you quite rightly can't discriminate against somebody because of their religious beliefs or their non-religious beliefs or their race and so on. It should also be the case that you can't discriminate against people because of their political views which, as we saw in the Brexit referendum, actually a majority of people agree with.
Well, exactly right. I mean, it's not exactly extremist, is it? What about the idea that somehow, you know, the bank can take this view? It's been suggested to me in the past that it might be against the Equalities Act, but, I mean, is the government likely to be able to impose any more sort of restrictions, shall we say, on banks operating like this? Well,
we have had encouraging noises from the City Minister, and so I hope hopefully the answer to that question is going to be an emphatic yes. But at the moment, we're in a position where clearly more does need to be done, because if this is happening to Nigel Farage, you can guarantee it's happening to other people as well. And one of the features of this particular type of cancellation is that we suspect that for many people who've had this happen to them, where a bank has closed their account, you're probably going to want to keep that quiet, because otherwise you're going to have immense difficulty opening up accounts with other banks. So we suspect and fear that this is a much more widespread phenomenon. And we've already had a lot of contact from people who are concerned about this, or we've had run-ins with various payment providers. And we've been helping people across the political spectrum deal with those types of situations at the Free Speech Union. So I just say again, this isn't just about Nigel Farage. As he himself has said, this is a much broader issue. And I would feel just as indignant about this if it had happened to Diane Abbott or Caroline Lucas or somebody on the left. It's not about whether you like Nigel Farage or not. It's much, much bigger than that. And we've reached a very sinister point where banks feel that they are justified in doing this. And they've reached a level of sanctimonious self-righteousness where they think that this is a justifiable thing to do. But also where people on the left, unfortunately too many, are completely unconcerned by this, which I think is terribly short-sighted.
Well, that is the problem with people on the left, is that they don't like certain people, therefore anything that those people say or do is a problem, as opposed to actually looking at what it is that they're saying and what it is that they're doing, and then perhaps supporting what they're saying and what they're doing. You know, it's a sort of blind madness. It's some kind of, you know, they convince themselves that everything that the Tories do is evil, that everything Nigel Farage does is somehow xenophobic. I mean, it is quite pathetic, really, in its kind of infancy. Because the clear problem here as well, presumably, is if you have a bank account cancelled, it has some reflection on your credit rating, doesn't it?
Well, that's the fear, and this is why we suspect this will be a much more widespread problem than we currently believe, and we already have substantial evidence now, not least from Nigel Farage. Subject that. One of the lines, incidentally, that struck me particularly from that disclosure that the bank was forced to make was the line that Nigel Farage's views were distasteful and appear increasingly out of touch with wider society. And it may be that those views are incompatible with the people who run Coutts, or the people at the top of the NatWest group, or with people at the top of society in the civil service, in academia, in the media. Clearly they are out of touch with those views and deeply unsympathetic to those sorts of people. But for many millions of people, Nigel Farage is one of very few figures articulating a perspective that is otherwise unrepresented or substantially underrepresented in Parliament. And so he has the right to express those views. And I would put actually to Coutts that it is they who are completely out of touch with what people want and the diversity of political perspectives in Britain, only some of which are deemed to be acceptable.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Rather like the people who continually maintain that anyone who is somehow against the absolute free and open borders policy that some would like to see here in this country is somehow some kind of far-right bigot. You know, like the people down in Llanelli who are trying to stop a particular hotel from being taken over by a government contractor who wants to put illegal migrants in there. You know, they're somehow being categorised and painted as being far right when they're simply neighbours in an area which is residential who don't want something and they haven't been asked if they want it and they're demonstrating against it. I mean, to be fair, if it was just Stop Oil doing it, they wouldn't be tarnished in that way.
Well, the range of acceptable views in Britain seems to be getting narrower and narrower. We see that in our work at the Free Speech Union. We've helped more than 2,000 people in 3 years who have been censured or punished or lost their job or kicked out of their university or whatever it may be for expressing their views. And in this case, the bank, I mean, they may as well put a sign on the door saying no critics of trans ideology, no Brexiteers, no lockdown skeptics. Those views are all completely intolerable and will discriminate against you if you hold them, which is completely unacceptable, particularly for a banking group, as you pointed out. I think the taxpayer has a 39% holding in.
Exactly. I mean, have you been able to discover whether you can help people whose bank accounts are getting closed? Because obviously, as you say, this may happen to people who are not particularly high profile and they may not know what to do. What should they do if it does happen to them?
Well, the first step is contact the Free Speech Union. You can find all of our contact details on our website. We do have a lot of experience, growing experience, sadly, in this particular area. And then I think the first recommendation would be that you send in a subject access request, a data request, for all the material that a bank or payment processor holds on you. We have several legal cases ongoing that began last year, about which I can't give too much detail now, where we are fighting the closure of people's accounts on the basis of their political or philosophical views. And as I said, this isn't just people from the right, it's across the political spectrum. And that's what I really want to get across here, that this is not just about Nigel Farage. This is happening to people on the left, the right and the centre.
Right. And his ability to access the information that he was able to get his hands on yesterday, is that relatively easy to do that if you're an ordinary citizen?
Yes, it is. Everyone has the right to access personal data that a bank or a business or an employer or whatever holds about them. We can help you draft those requests. It's frequently the first thing we recommend to people who are dealing with a situation of this, whether it's that they've been debanked or they've been cancelled in some other way. But it's a terrifying moment. I mean, it's bad enough to be forced out of your job and not be able to pay your rent or mortgage because of your political views. But to get to the point where you can't even have a bank account, it's shocking.
And it's incredible how easy it is to kind of put a spanner in the works of your life as well. Because I had for a while a problem with a business account of mine, which I couldn't access because I didn't have, a card reader that worked properly. And because I had to go through the motions to get things sent to me, there was about a 2-week period where I couldn't get out any of the money, which wreaked all kinds of havoc because you're so used to just being able to move money or get money or put money in or whatever it is, that when you suddenly can't do it, your life is completely in turmoil.
Yeah, and as we've seen from some of these other cases, people have discovered that they've been debanked because they've gone to the shop, they've tried to use their card and it hasn't worked. And that's the first they've heard of the fact that their bank account is being closed. Yeah,
incredible stuff. Ben, really good to talk to you. Thanks for your advice as well. Ben Jones, Deputy Case Director of the Free Speech Union, who says, rather reluctantly now, that actually it's becoming a massive story. And the Free Speech Union are beginning to have to help loads and loads of people who have had the same thing happen to them. So if it has happened to you and you need some help, go to them, but also talk to us as well. 0344 499 1000. Ian in York says, Mike Ray, Nigel Farage, we have been brainwashed to fear and hate the right. This is part of the creeping authoritarianism of the left, which is far more insidious. The socialism of Drakeford, Sturgeon and Khan shows us just how authoritarian they are prepared to be. Starmer will be the same. This country is in a bloody mess because of this liberal left crap, and if Labour get in, it will only get worse. God, blimey, what a thought. I can't look forward to that. This is TalkTV.